go into detail there. But how do we get here? What are the drivers? How do we end up with this, what I think is a significant problem? And in fact, we did a study not that long ago. We did the study, the International Stem Cell Community, and found it was ranked as the #1 policy issue in this area, the marketing of unproven stem cells, above embryonic stem cell research issues, around patenting issues, around consent issues. It was ranked as the number one issue. What are the drivers? Well, the first is, I've touched on it already, and this is the problem of hype. This has been an extremely exciting field, and there's huge pressure on stem cell researchers to get to the clinic quickly. So that creates an environment where hype is common, and it also can feed patient expectations. There have been a lot of promises in the area of stem cells for good reasons, but there have been a lot of promises. You get headline after headline after headline touting the great potential of stem cells, right? That stem cells can cure things, that stem cells are going to revolutionize medicine, that stem cells can treat diabetes, as this headline says, that stem cell therapy repairs heart attack damage, says this headline, which that was just an early stage clinical trial. And then we have Peyton Manning again. If you are a desperate mom or dad and you got a sick kid, or if you are desperate yourself and you see these headlines and then read about those clinics, it sounds really plausible, right? It sounds really, really plausible. So that hype kind of feeds the industry, right? In fact, we just published, just this week, in Science Translational Medicine, this study where we actually mapped how popular culture, how newspapers represent the readiness of stem cells. So these are reports of real stem cell research projects, and how did the newspapers represent their readiness? And we went back numerous years to map this out. And what did we find? Almost 70% of them said that these therapies were going to be in the clinic in 5 to 10 years or sooner, which is completely unrealistic if you know how translation process works. So we have that kind of hype out there, and it's understandable. I'm not blaming the research community because I think it's a systemic problem. There's so much pressure on them, but nevertheless, that hype exists. So you have that kind of hype about stem cells in general, and then you also have some fascinating portrayals of these actual clinics. And I want to focus on this a little bit because I think you'll find it interesting. So this was a study that we did that had published not that long ago, 5 years ago, and I think it's gotten worse since then. What we did is we looked at how these clinics were portrayed. So these are newspaper stories about these clinics, right? About patients going to these clinics. Right? These aren't newspaper stories about stem cell research. These are newspaper stories about these clinics. And look what we found. It's really amazing. We found that almost all of the stories are positive or neutral. So these are stories about these, some of them fraudulent clinics, right? And in newspapers, they're portrayed in a positive light. Only a small percentage are viewed as negative. There's that one dip there, you see, that's the ISSCR. When the ISSCR released a report talking about the dangers of stem cell tourism, but it quickly pops up again right after that, the positive tone. Let me give you some examples of the kind of headlines. Here's one, Dakota was born blind, but now the 3-year-old can see as a result of getting stem cell therapy. I think this is in China. Is that possible? No. Hope for Harvey against palsy. They're human interest stories often. Trip to Mexico, last resort. I really like this example. It's in the Toronto Star, one of the best-known newspapers in Canada. And the reason I find this one fascinating is because not only do they give the trip a very positive light, as you can see in this quote I have here, it's going to cost $150,000, and they tell the reader where they can send money to donate to send this person to the clinic, which is really remarkable. Now, I don't know this clinic. I want to be careful about the language I use describing it, but let's just say hypothetically it is a fraudulent clinic. I don't know the intent of these people. The Toronto Star is helping to raise money to give to a clinic that perhaps is less than honest about what they're doing. I've got to be careful about the language there because I don't know the intent of these providers, and that's a very interesting question in itself that deserves more study. Here's another good example from Canada. This one came out a little while ago. Actually, this one came out right before one of the last times I spoke to a StemCellTalks group. And here have a group of students, not unlike you guys, raising money to send with their classmates to China And this is a blind classmate, and they're having a penny drive to raise money to send them there. As you can see, that thousands of dollars to send them, and they were short, so they're going to hold a dance that night to raise the rest. And it's really heartbreaking. Here's the student talking. I just can't wait to see the sun and colors and trees. Almost $20,000 the students raised. Of the $35,000 was sent, and they were going to have this, as I said, this dance to raise the rest. Heartbreaking, right? Heartbreaking. And here is a very recent one, and it's a great, great example for you guys. So this is a couple from Edmonton, basically. St. Albert's, just outside Edmonton. And this couple, this family is sending their father to Mexico to get a treatment similar to what Gordie Howe. Now, the reason I find this so fascinating is it was the Gordie Howe story, and they say that, they're quoted there, that caused them to go to this clinic and spend their money on this clinic. So this other interesting phenomenon that's happening, and other driver, is that, and this again relates to my introduction, is that increasingly stem cells are talked about in completely, I call them critic-free zones. So that we're not talking about the front page of the newspaper or the science section of the newspaper. This is now increasingly talked about in the sports page. And I love the Nadal example. In fact, we did a little study on this, on how it was portrayed. And the Nadal story was everyone knows Nadal, right? He allegedly got, I think he's number 3 in the world now, and he got stem cells on his lower back, and it was portrayed absolutely everywhere as efficacious, or at least the effectiveness was assumed. And this was all in sports publications, right? ESPN, Sports Illustrated, the Washington Post sports section, Tennis World, Fox Sport. This is where it's portrayed. There's no critical portrayal of stem cells there. It's taken for granted that it's going to work. The only critical one I could find was by a stem cell researcher in California. He does great work. This is a great blog, by the way, for interested in stem cells. And he points out how this is probably a dubious stem cell treatment. The other place it's completely shown as completely efficacious is in the context of cosmetics and anti-aging. In fact, it's portrayed as a stem cell. Skin therapies are one of the most major medical breakthroughs in history. God, that's a terrible sentence. And are being widely used as treatment options for the cure of cancer and other diseases. What a great example of science exploitation. They're saying it's already being used to cure cancer and other diseases. There's, some cancers it's being used for. And now they're using that excitement to sell these bogus treatments. And here, there's so many of them, facelifts. And I love that, again, in fact, it's so ubiquitous now that Elle magazine, everyone knows Elle magazine probably, they have a list of the best stem cell face creams, as if it's so efficacious and effective that we can now start listing the best ones, right? It's just ridiculous. Now, the other place it's starting to happen and become more common is in the context of social media. And we're doing a lot of work in this area. So we've already looked at patient blogs, and what did we find there? No surprise, the reason patients are going to these clinics is because they believe there's no side effects associated with them. They think that that's the only choice they have, that they may die anyway, and that, why not give it a try? Who can say? But the one I find most interesting is the one on your right there, where a lot of these patients portray themselves as science pioneers, therapy pioneers, and they're angry at their home jurisdiction, whether it's Canada or the United States or the UK or wherever. They're angry. They think it's deplorable and inhumane that they must put themselves in harm's way. These treatments should be available in Canada, is the language. Again, as I said before, as if these things are effective and they're being withheld. And that same message came from that Gordie Howe story from Edmonton that I just referred to. The patients thought it was effective, and God, why isn't it being offered in Canada?